I'm so delighted that you're joining us for Accelerate today, and our guest is very, very special. We've had several meetings before. She has fascinated me each time. I've learned a ton each time. Her name is Elizabeth Onyeabor. Let me tell you a little bit about her first. She is a leading international expert on perfectionist leaders and high achievers. As the founder of InnerGenuity, Liz coaches leaders ready to put perfectionism in its place to achieve greater impact and profitability. Liz has guided both individual and organizational transformations around the world for more than 25 years and has been featured on ABC, CBS, in the Boston Herald, the Wall Street Week, Fox, and NBC. And she's also an award-winning, best-selling author and poet. Liz, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
It's my pleasure to be with you today, Matt.
I'm really excited about our conversation. And I wanted to dive in because perfectionism is not something that a lot of people, I think, talk about in terms of leadership, but they're thinking about it and they're impacted by it. And so to give more of an explicit, direct approach to, hey, let's talk about this thing, I think is really valuable. And I'd love to learn more with you and hopefully help other people.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, there tends to be more perfectionism with leaders because we're so driven in many cases to hit a very high standard. And certain occupations actually have more people who consider themselves perfectionists and are troubled by perfectionism. And that tends to be like doctors, lawyers, architects.
Shocking.
But they say that 1 in 3 may have perfectionism. But there's 3 different types of perfectionism. And the first is self-imposed. And that's the expectations we have of ourselves. And the second is other-oriented perfectionism, the expectations we place on others. And then the third type is socially oriented perfectionism, and that's what we think others expect of us. And we can have one or all 3 or just 2 of these 3 types of perfectionism.
So on that theme of the different types of perfectionism, and we touched on a little bit offline before, can you help our audience distinguish between the perfectionist and perfectionism, just to go further on this definitions?
Yeah, sure. So, as a perfectionist, that's part of our identity. So we say, typically we're like proud, like we have high standards, we're driven, like we're the get it done person. We raise our hand when there's something to be done. Like, so we basically have this perfectionist identity, and it's like a badge of honor, we're proud of it. Well, the perfectionism can be crippling, and the perfectionism is what happens when we beat ourselves up, when we don't meet that high expectation that we have, and our inner critic goes wild, and we basically carry around an inner brand of shame, which is the perfectionism, and it can be really crippling. And we tend to think it's just me, but honestly, it's all self-oriented perfectionists who can have this crippling perfectionism.
So there's a lot there that you just covered. As far as the definitions go, I can think of the ist is the identity and the ism is the condition. And so if I can separate out those two, it's harder to deal with the identity than it is if you focus on the ism, which is something you can actually work on. It's a better
nobody says, I don't want to be a perfectionist anymore.
Right.
They just want to get rid of the ism part of it, the issues, the procrastination, the critical self-judgment. Essentially, we have a lot of difficulty starting things or finishing things. And it creates a lack of agility as well.
So before we go into some of what the negative impacts, what are some of the signs? I definitely want to get into that shortly, but I'd like to go back in time just for a couple of minutes here and get a little backstory from you, because you have quite a history and quite a career. You've done a lot in, human resources and poetry and all these other fascinating things. How did you come to this focus on perfectionism?
It's funny because at some level I had awareness as I was doing self-discovery and writing some of my books that perfectionism was affecting me. I had a lot of mom guilt. I had a lot of leader guilt. I didn't think I was doing enough for my team. I wasn't the kind of leader that they should have. I was really, really hard on myself. And I guess what happened was I created a program and I realized that the people I was attracting the most were perfectionists. And also, I would say in my journey, what happened with me is that I had this really deep inner loathing because I really thought that I wasn't good enough. And so that affected everything from, both professionally and personally. And I felt like I had what I would call a black hole in my soul, because I would do achievement after achievement after achievement, and it'd just be like sucked in, like no achievement ever really lasted. And so I almost felt like a hamster on a wheel, chasing achievement after achievement after achievement, like maybe I'll then feel good enough. But see, this is the hallmark of perfectionism, is that we don't feel good enough and we think it's just us, but it is perfectionism at play. And that's why I say, let's put it in its place, because we can feel good enough. And it's not that we don't love ourselves, but expanding and integrating and loving our whole self. And that's what they talk about the dark night of the soul and that kind of thing. And I like to say, I walked through the valley of my shadow and wished for death.
That's a good one. I haven't heard that one before. That's really good.
That's part of one of my poems. So
that's a Liz Onyeabor original.
Yeah, so that's a line from one of my poems. Because it got to such a point that I just wanted the pain to go away. But so much of that was fueled by the perfectionism, not believing that, I wasn't meeting these standards up here. So when I discovered that actually so many of the clients, or, the vast majority of the clients that I was attracting were perfectionists, I was like, okay, yeah. I understood this route for me, and I thought, well, I'm going to work with perfectionists because the perfectionism is really what's holding us back.
Sure. Yeah. What are some of the other signs? You described your own personal experience that brought you to this focus as you work with clients and reflecting on your past, whether you were working on it, knowingly or not. What are some of the other additional signs that you see that say, hey, we may have a perfectionism problem here?
Yeah. So one of the things that I work with clients first is about awareness. And so the definition of a perfectionist or perfectionism is that you set a high standard and then you don't think you meet it. And then we have this not good enough gap. And then the second component of this, which is really important, is that we may set a high standard and actually meet it. And then we say, well, wait a minute, that was too easy. I should have done a higher goal, right? And then we subconsciously create this not good enough gap. So it's this constant state of not feeling good enough, having a very critical inner voice, and so it's this cycle of setting a high standard, either not thinking we meet it or we meet it, and then we're like, I should have done more, shoulda, coulda, woulda. That is the very definition of the self-oriented perfectionism. And it affects all sorts of things, like we tend to have weaker boundaries. We tend to say yes to people. We tend to get overwhelmed. We tend to get analysis paralysis. So we don't start things, or we get overwhelmed, and then we're like, oh, but it's not going to be perfect. They talk about FOMO as a fear of missing out, but for perfectionists, it's not fear of missing out. It's really fear of mistake overwhelm. Right? We're so afraid we're going to make a mistake that we may not start something in the first place, or we research something to death, just trying to cross all the T's and dot the I's.
Yeah.
And we're usually far more empathic and compassionate with other people than we are ourselves. And so even though, and here's a stunning piece of research, that procrastination is something that perfectionists really worry about. The stunning discovery of this 10-year mega research is that perfectionists don't actually procrastinate any more frequently than the general population. However, we worry about it more. So we're very achievement oriented. And so we like to tick those boxes,
Right.
But ticking those boxes doesn't give us a sense of lasting accomplishment. And so we tend to be driven by this sense of lasting accomplishment. And, so boundaries are issues, a lot of overwhelm. Like, I can't tell you, even myself, I used to say, I'd rather have too much on my plate than not enough. Right?
Yeah.
And I look back at that now and go, what about ease? What about,
I remember going through law school, and at the end of law school, I mean, when you just in the community of lawyers, there was this workaholism thing it was a badge of honor how many hours you dedicated to working in the firm or whatever. I mean, that was, people would go around and talk about that, and it got to a level of absurdity because, of course, many of those people were quite miserable. Not having a life.
Burnout is a big problem with perfectionism because, the billable hours, of course, that's a challenge. You've got to have a reasonable amount of billable hours, but we tend to go into overdrive, right? And then get overwhelmed, and then we get burnt out, and then we're kind of like, oh, well, let me just chill for a little while, but then we start on that hamster wheel all over again. So it's this cycle that keeps repeating, and it makes us not want to take decisions quickly, so we're not as agile. We feel like we need a lot of information, and we keep questioning, and we often hear from other people, your standards are too high, or your standards are really high, and we think, no, our standards are great. Like, you need to measure up.
Now, that's a good metric, because one of the things when you're trying to diagnose if is this me, is really helpful when you get those external cues too. There's the internal thing, but for me, a sign like that, it's like, do people say this to you? And you're like, yeah. And then, is this how you feel? Yeah. And it's like, oh, you might be. You might be suffering from perfectionism.
Right? Well, it's funny because my husband's a computer engineer, and he used to develop software, and then he would show me, and he'd love for me to pick it apart because I was so critical, right?
Yeah.
because I was always looking for the problem.
Right.
So we tend to be, now we don't think we're critical, right? We think that in our pursuit of excellence or perfection, we think everybody should have this kind of standard. And here's a mindset shift, okay? So bringing my husband back into this, he's like, well, I have high standards. Why don't you call me a perfectionist? And I said, so when you don't meet the standards that you expect of yourself, do you beat yourself up over it?
Mm-hmm.
And he says, well, no, of course not. I'm just learning. Why would I beat myself up?
There you go. You're not suffering from perfectionism right there.
Exactly.
That's like, yeah. So really what people should think about is, what is the impact on me? How am I responding to it? That's really where to look if you want to get real with yourself about whether or not you're suffering from it, is what am I telling myself? And I love that changing standard. It's like this belief that perfection is actually, it's like almost, is this right? It's like an acknowledgement that, yes, I know that I'm not perfect and that nothing is ever actually perfect. Therefore, I am always going to be less than perfect. Therefore, if I reach a certain standard, it must not be perfect. And so I'm stuck in a trap of never good enough.
Right. And I would like to shift that paradigm to say you were born perfect.
Mm.
And you don't have to strive or earn, or you are already deserving of
Right.
being good enough.
Right.
Because you don't have to strive or earn it, And so there's this, we think we have to get it, right?
Right. How would you, there's a lot online right now. A lot of practitioners are focusing on what they call imposter syndrome, or the sense that I'm faking it, basically. How do you distinguish between if it's an imposter syndrome situation and a perfectionism situation, or are those distinguishable?
That's really a great question, because there are researchers that put perfectionism under the umbrella of imposter syndrome. And the people that I know who work with imposter syndrome, it tends to be more of a temporary situation. Now, we may feel imposter syndrome from time to time, especially as we expand our comfort zone. And so they tend to be more situational, but perfectionist, it's not like you overcome being a perfectionist, like you overcome imposter syndrome. Putting perfectionism in its place is really about accepting and practicing other things that really help you, A, create awareness, B, acknowledge, C, shift that mindset and utilize practices that are more beneficial for you. So imposter syndrome tends to be, well, I feel like a fraud, or I don't feel like I'm leading, or because I had imposter syndrome that was driven by the perfectionism.
Mm.
Okay, so they are interrelated, but I would say that imposter syndrome tends to be more situational, and so it will come and go as we kind of expand.
That's a really good distinction to keep in mind of. You're not gonna get rid of the perfectionist tendencies. You're going to learn to live with it and be healthy with it. And also, there's a strength that's intertwined with that too, in that you have high standards and you want to do really well, but not get punished by the part of it that will eat you alive. Is that kind of accurate?
Yeah, so researchers differ on this. And,
okay. How so? Yeah.
Well,
enlighten us.
some say that there's good perfectionism and bad perfectionism, and others say, well, there is no good perfectionism. What they call the good perfectionism is really just having high standards, because the perfectionism by its definition really is when you don't meet those high standards, that you are highly critical, and you take a more of a fixed mindset than an opener learning mindset. So we believe that the perfectionism, these high standards, yeah, they're fine. I'm not telling anybody, let go of your high standards, okay? Because I remember I was working with a client, and she said, well, I'm kind of worried, like, I don't want to let go of my high standards. And I said, don't let go of your high standards. Let go of beating yourself up when you don't meet them. Or, the other oriented, like, don't be so critical of your staff when they don't quite meet it that, like, they feel eviscerated,
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this, there's a balance, but really when we let go of that critical part of it, we can keep those high standards. But having high standards in and of itself is not perfectionism.
So if we're thinking about this, if I'm hearing you correctly, there's utility in sort of separating it out and using those words for different purposes. So having high standards is good. Perfectionism is dangerous to you and others. And
yeah, it can be crippling.
Unhealthy. It can be crippling. So
it can be toxic. Yeah.
That makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. So we know that it causes huge problems. We know that people suffer from it, and a lot of people suffer from it. We know it causes a lot of pain, personally and in a group scenario as well. And there are, by the way, before we go into the solutions for it, do you have any resources you can help point people to in terms of self-diagnosis, or do they just need to hire you and have you help them?
No, I actually have something that they can take. So usually when I work with people, we look at how much of a perfectionist are you. So I have a reference point of 1,500 other perfectionists, and so it's a self-assessment. And we can walk people through that, and you can share the link with anyone who wants to take that.
Okay. So in the description, we'll put links to all the resources that we talk about in the podcast, and that would be a good one to get started with, just to see if you kind of already think you might be suffering from it. Yeah, you might want to validate that. And now let's move into there's hope.
There is hope.
Yeah, let's talk about the hope, Liz. What are some ways that people can break free from I think it's the procrastinating that goes along with perfectionism, and also just start addressing this?
Yeah. So let me do two things. One is, I'll talk about procrastination and one thing that they can do. But I have 7 steps, a 7-step system that I provide my clients. And it starts with the perfectionist mindset, where we create awareness, because awareness is really important of what's going on. And then we look at excellent goals, creating clarity and calming the inner critic. And the third step is results. And this has to do with procrastination. There are 4 main reasons why everybody procrastinates. And the first one of those is belief. So for us as perfectionists, the belief very often is that we're afraid of failure. We're afraid of making a mistake. And so we don't start it, or we put it off. And this is really, I think, the number one reason. There are other reasons, okay? So to address that, it's really aligning with focusing on what does success look like. And I have tools that I work with my clients on really aligning better with removing and releasing some of those self-limiting beliefs that cause us to think, it's never going to be right. I shouldn't start it, all that kind of stuff. And like I said, we are pretty hard on ourselves on procrastination because we're so achievement oriented, but we actually don't procrastinate any more than the general population. So anyway, I have some tools on procrastination that I work with. So that's the third step. And then the fourth step is really finding forgiveness. And this is creating space for grace for ourselves. So we can reduce that self-judgment. And the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah, we're
fifth one. Yeah.
We're on 5.
Yeah. Empathy and self-compassion. To be kinder to ourselves. This is about emotional resiliency. And then So perfectionist mindset, excellent goals, results, finding forgiveness, empathy and self-compassion, connection with the full self. So this is about asserting boundaries, which we tend to raise our hand. I mean, I used to do this all the time. We would raise our hand. Oh, I'll volunteer. I'll do that because it makes us feel valued. But then we get too much on our plate,
right?
Right. And we're kind of the go-to get it done person, but at great cost to ourselves personally. Right. And so that the last one is take time to celebrate. And that's really about boosting our dopamine and celebrating progress along the way. Because what happens as perfectionists is we tend to say, okay, I'll celebrate when I'm done. But then here's what happens. We have this high standard. We don't think we met it. And so we have this not good enough gap. And we don't want to celebrate because we don't think we deserve it. Because we haven't hit our standard. So all of those together spell perfect. Those my 7 perfect steps.
It's the perfect steps, really. It's the perfect path. There you go. That's the name of your next program, The Perfect Path.
And I have more details in a handout, in a link that you'll provide about putting perfectionism in its place using these 7 steps.
Now, look, there are probably people who are like, yeah, that's all great. But, if you've relied on that self-perception of your perfectionism as a strength to boost yourself in a sense, even though it's hurting you, let's talk about what the more benefits of what it's going to mean externally for those who are not convinced that the internal is enough. What about the people around them? What results are they going to see even beyond their own well-being and health in business, for example?
So here's, I guess, one of the best examples is one of my clients who was like, this changed my life. Just the awareness alone. My family said I was acting differently. My direct reports said I was acting differently. And this individual is responsible. I mean, basically he said, look, the decisions I make impact 5,000 people in the organization. And he said, so if I delay on a decision because I'm trying to make it perfect, I'm not responding to the market, to competitors. We're not getting our products or services out as quickly. I'm handicapping my staff because I'm not delegating as much as I would like to because I want everybody to get it perfect. And so I overwhelm myself. And he's like, the pressure has shifted, and they were able to respond more quickly to the market. The impact on the entire, cascading of the organization, the piece that he's responsible for, it shifted. So his direct reports, his entire team or his part of the organization became more agile because he became more agile.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Now every time I say the word perfect, I'm gonna be going, wait a minute, what's going on here? It really does. I mean, agility, innovation. I think of psychological safety. It's hard to create a psychologically safe environment if people feel judged, because you're judging yourself really harshly, but you're also judging others by that same standard. And if you can show yourself a little more grace and everyone else, they're gonna feel like they can take a risk and create something new and not include you in absolutely everything, which is going to tie you down.
And I'm going to add one more thing that really struck me, because it isn't what we set out to do, but the relationships with customers and clients improved. And so that also was a really huge factor. So it's like the benefit is a bottom line benefit. You know, there are tangible results to this.
Right.
All through just this leader shifting, and his entire organization, it just cascaded down.
Right. So I can imagine an executive who's like, something's wrong, I'm not quite sure. Then they might even get a coach that's going to approach it from a traditional executive coaching or leadership coaching standpoint, and they'll sit down and ask them what they want to do, and they'll miss the entire opportunity because they're not addressing sort of the elephant in the room, which is their perfectionism. And if they asked other people, they'd get a clear view. So it seems to me that really paying attention to the people around you, what they're saying or not saying, and giving that the value it deserves might help you get sort of out of the delusional state that we all get in about ourselves, and get out of it, and then address the real issue. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder how many leaders you've come across that are suffering from it but don't see it yet.
You know, I've worked with quite a number of leaders that they didn't come to me initially due to perfectionism. And then I would hear them say certain things, and I would say, do you consider yourself a perfectionist? And some of them don't kind of identify that way. But if I say things like, do you have, exceptionally high standards that you're proud of? And are you hard on yourself when you don't meet them? And do you feel like you kind of need to control everything because people aren't going to get it done right? So you can't delegate. And it's really frustrating for you because you would like to delegate more, but you just don't think your staff are going to get it done in the way that it needs to happen. They're like, yeah. Okay, ding, ding, ding.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I thank you. That's kind of what I was alluding to. Was I'll bet that's a lot of the times the situation where you don't come in through the front door on it. You kind of, and then eventually it's like, oh yeah, this is the real issue, or the opportunity for the most breakthrough, the most growth and relief, frankly.
Yeah. So the relief is tremendous because when you can put perfectionism in its place, but keep your standards as a perfectionist, but the pressure, the crippling aspects of it, there's a sense of freedom, really, and professionally, it helps. Like I said, the bottom line, it helps with the team, it helps with the customers, and everybody's a little bit different, but there are certain hallmarks that when I bring the community of these leaders together from time to time when I have group programs, what I think is the most remarkable is, wait, you mean it's not just me?
Right. I'm not alone.
I'm not alone.
Right.
You have the same issue, or if I'm just working one-on-one, sometimes it's like, well, Liz, you went through this and you were able to set that down and put it aside. I would be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, perfectionism. It seems like it's this sort of we all have experienced either suffering from it or suffering directly from internally or suffering from it externally. I know I certainly have, and on both sides. And yet it's not. I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something, but it's not always the first thing that people are thinking about. There's all these other things, the toxic leader, the this or that. But and yet it's quite prevalent. So you're in a zone that I think is much needed, and I think you're going to be helping even more people as time goes on, as the word gets out. Liz, you've already shared that you have a great resource for helping someone understand whether or not or uncover their perfectionism and see that it's causing them a problem. And you've got these 7 principles. I think they were principles, right? Practices of perfectionism, of perfectionists. You've got a lot of resources. Any other resources that people should know about, and where do people go to connect with you and interact with you?
Well, they can go to my website, InnerGenuity.com, INNERGENUITY. And also I'm on Twitter at Elizabeth Onyeabor, and Instagram, I think it's the same. So all of those places you can connect with me, and those are on my website. And I have a newsletter that I put out weekly, so I give tips every week for leaders.
So they would go to the website to register for the newsletter, I assume.
Sure, yeah.
And are you also on LinkedIn? Are you active on LinkedIn as well?
Yes, I'm very, yeah. I should have said LinkedIn first, right?
I was going to say.
Yeah, I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I post a lot of information there. So if they follow me on LinkedIn, they can do a search or you can create a link on the page, and they can follow me, and I give tips there as well.
So in the description, we will put the website, the LinkedIn connection link, so you can find Liz there, and maybe even direct links to those resources that we mentioned before, so you can easily get wherever you're at. If you're not ready to talk to Liz quite yet, but you want to get her newsletter, you'll be able to do that. You'll be able to self-diagnose to a point. And I do encourage people watching and or listening to this to reach out to Liz. I found you to be so, you're full of insights. You have extreme brilliance and wisdom and a gentle way of doing it, so that there's no judgment. It's just, let's help each other. I'm here to help. And I think at the end of the day, there's nothing better than that when you've got someone like yourself that has such incredible knowledge and heart that you bring to the table. That's been my experience with Liz over multiple conversations now. So if you think you might be suffering from perfectionism, or someone that you work for, that you live with, that is struggling with this, don't hesitate at all to reach out to Elizabeth. She's your person. So.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. And is there any final word you want to send out into the universe about this issue and the opportunities that come with addressing
I'm just going to give one final tip. And that is, a lot of people talk about inner critic and, shutting it up and things like that. But really, your inner critic can become your best friend, because your inner critic is actually trying to protect you, even though it doesn't seem that all that harsh judgment. So there's one tip that I would like to leave with people, which is, when you're hard on yourself, I would like you to ask yourself a question, which is, what would a best friend say to you in this instance? And can you reframe what's going on for you from that perspective to allow your inner critic to be of more value to you, or your inner voice, let me say, to be of more value to you, and just reframe it as, what would a best friend say?
You just proved my previous point. That is a wonderful, wonderful way of looking at it. Thank you for sharing just a little bit of what you bring to the table on this important topic. Liz, I'm really glad we got to spend this time together, and I know it's going to help a lot of people.
Me too. Thanks so much, Matt.
Thanks a lot.